Ray, should we just... What are you doing?
Me?
What are you doing?
What do you mean?
Are you filming this?
I'm turning off my phone. Okay.
Looks like you got a fancy camera on that phone. Taking any poignant black and white photos with it?
No, not really, no.
Oh, of like your feet on like an autumn day or something? No?
No.
Well, that's why our Instagram sucks.
You'd
All
think
right.
my
Ray's
feet would
posting
help.
feet pics again.
People want to see the feet. Yeah.
They do. They love
We
the
have,
feet.
we have a really weird audience. Yeah.
Anyone asked for that?
Nobody
Well,
is
not
yet
not
asked
in
for
so
feet.
many words. I mean, you know, it's a hard thing to ask for. We can make it a Patreon bonus for like the German level. Pictures of Ray's feet.
That should put that in the German level.
Yes. All right, let's make this episode. This is The Empire Never Ended. I'm Fritz. I'm here with Boris and
Hello.
Ray, who is still suffering from the old ANP-itis.
Oh, is
Yeah.
he suffering?
That's true, yeah.
You're looking a little rough around
I'm
the edges.
looking forward to ending this whole ordeal.
Yeah?
I think it will be another long one, judging by the amount of notes that I have. They're
Yeah,
roughly
it's
the
only
same as last
40
time.
pages of notes. I mean,
Yes.
that's a perfectly normal amount of notes to make.
I basically went through the whole book like the last time, the American
Yeah.
Führer by Frederick Simonelli.
So this is what, the third time you read it now?
No, this is the... I read the second part for the second time
Uh-huh.
now. And I kind of gave up on the other book that I mentioned last time because...
Yeah, it didn't sound that great.
This one is... the other book I read only once. And I took the notes from this one. It's much more concise.
Yeah. Concision is what we really excel at here
Yeah.
at The Empire Never Ended.
Yes.
Indeed.
So this is the second episode on the American Nazi Party and George Lincoln Rockwell.
The saddest Nazi
For
clown.
his early life and how he became a Nazi and started the party, you should listen to our last free episode.
Yeah, it's a hoot.
And so this episode will have 4 parts. The first one had 3. The first part will be the World Union of National Socialists, Rockwell's global movement.
The World Union of National Socialists. All right.
WUNS?
WUNS, yeah. World
Alright.
Union of
WUNS.
National Socialists. I call them WUNS.
They're WUNS. All right, we got it.
Yes, he said that this is proof to his family when he told him he's a
Yes.
psychotic loser. He said, "No,
Yes.
I'm the leader of a global movement,"
Yes.
and tried
He's a
to prove me
WUNSist
wrong.
now.
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
The second part will be about the concept, this very sophisticated concept of white power that we'll
Okay.
discuss.
Oh.
Looking forward to that.
Third part will be AMP's relationship with Christian identity movement. And the fourth part will be about Rockwell's death.
Yay!
Yay!
He dies.
Yes. So, according to William Pierce,
Hey, I know.
we'll
him.
have a bunch of episodes about him.
Yeah, I think
Right.
about the same amount. I think it's
Yeah.
going to be another, cluster.
An AMP member who knew Rockwell personally, he said that Rockwell always understood the necessity to reorganize National Socialism as a global movement, and in that way form a new Aryan world order.
Should
So
they still call
already-
it National Socialism then? Seems like a misnomer at that point.
Yeah. But that's,
So it's international socialism is what they want.
this whole movement, is, yeah. So, already in 1959, he started formulating his plans for the establishment of a global network. And this is when he started the so-called World Union of Free Enterprise National Socialists that we mentioned last time, or WUNS.
Right.
Oh.
Yes?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I made a mistake last time. I said it was only him. Apparently there was at least one other guy involved in this. I will mention him later.
So you forgot half the members?
Yeah. And he wasn't an American guy. He wasn't. So it was a global movement. So in 61, he really started to have more frequent contacts with foreign Nazis, especially with one Colin Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
We know from our early episodes, he was a guy who Myatt knew personally and claimed that he was his bodyguard and a member of his group, the National Socialist Movement from England.
He did a nice Hitler impression.
Yeah. And no, that's his buddy, John Tyndall.
Oh, it's John Tyndall, right?
Who stole
yes.
his French Nazi wife, Françoise
Yes.
he was also a member of the same group, National Socialist Movement, until he stopped being that.
Oh, the lifestyles of the British Nazis.
Yeah. So they started corresponding in 61. They formed a friendship that lasted until Rockwell died. Jordan was important for Rockwell because he introduced him to various European Nazis and neo-Nazis. So two of these people were especially important for Rockwell. They had a big impact on him. These two people were Savitri Devi and Bruno Lüdke. So Savitri Devi we'll talk about more throughout this podcast, I think.
Yeah, she comes up a lot in all kinds of different corners.
Yes. She's a very weird Nazi.
Yeah.
So Savitri Devi was born as Maximiani Portas in Lyon, France in 1905. So she was a French woman of Greek origin. And she was a kind of a mystic. In 1932, she moved to India, supposedly to study ancient Aryan philosophy and rituals. She married an Indian guy there who was like a political leader of like pro-Nazi orientation, which was a thing in India back then.
Absolutely, yeah.
Changed
Still
her name
is.
to Savitri Devi and really became, by 1935, she became a Nazi and a really strong supporter of Hitler. So she's not even a neo-Nazi, she's a Nazi.
Yeah, original.
Right.
Yeah. And she was active in the pro-Axis circles in India. So after the war, she returned to Europe and she was imprisoned because she was a Nazi, like a propagandist the whole time, during the war and after the war. When she met Rockwell a few years later in England, she had a big impact on. It was reported, like this was in 62, it was reported that he was like mesmerized by Savitri Devi. So he liked her like mystical visions of a Nazi resurgence, and also that she had direct contacts with the Third Reich. Bruno Lüdke was a kind of a different guy. But he probably
This is Ray trying to be polite, I think. It's different.
He influenced Rockwell more than any other Nazi, probably, in his thinking about National Socialism as a global political movement. And it's interesting, he was an older guy and also a Nazi before the war, or maybe active because he was quite young during the war. He became active as a Hitlerjugend member during the war, but he was completely devoted to Rockwell, which is interesting because I think in our last episode, Boris mentioned something how these people would be, executed if the real Nazis were in power.
Yeah.
But it turns out in this episode that there were like actual Nazis and even some important ones who kind of saw Rockwell as the new leader of global National Socialism, which is
bizarre.
Well, maybe, it says
sad.
a lot about their movement, I guess.
Wasn't going well.
Yeah. So he also was in like very frequent correspondence with Rockwell from 1960-61 until Rockwell died in 67. And for Bruno Lüdke, the Third Reich was only a prelude for a global National Socialist empire, and he saw Rockwell as the key to that Nazi future. And he saw Rockwell as the most important National Socialist since Adolf Hitler and as his heir. Lüdke was born in 1926 in Hamburg. He came from a very weird conservative Christian family, which was considered like to be weird by other like Protestants there.
Okay.
And his father was he was an anti-Nazi kind of weird Christian. And Lüdke, I guess, had problems with his father, so he became a Nazi.
Fuck you, Dad.
Yeah, and when he was 14 in 1940, he joined the Hitlerjugend. And in 1943, he tried to enlist in the SS, but failed because, like, I guess, health problems, or he wasn't Aryan enough. But when Wehrmacht, like, really lowered their standards towards the end of the war,
Yeah.
they called him to service in October of 1944. He was stationed in Denmark, and after the war, he moved to Cologne and started to study engineering. And within 3 months, he married and divorced some woman, and who in this short period managed to they managed to produce a child. A lot of these people like have these super short marriages with a lot of kids somehow. So in 1960 he moved to Frankfurt. He was ill. He suffered from sclerosis and was often unemployed, and barely had the money to support his first wife, with whom he had one child, and then he had a second wife, with whom he had 4 daughters. So
Damn.
a lot of kids and living in poverty, often imprisoned because of Nazi stuff.
He reproduced quite prodigiously.
Yes.
Hey, when he was in Cologne, learning to be an engineer, do you know what kind of engineer?
I didn't make a note of that, so I don't know.
I wonder if he had a connection to the Ford plant there.
Oh,
that
yeah,
was,
it's possible.
bringing in,
Yeah.
like, completely happy to bring in Nazi engineers and workers and at the
Yeah.
time.
I mean, he wasn't important at all at the time,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, I mean, it's possible. So this whole time he was like very national socialist, but was kind of depressed about the whole thing, them losing the war and so on. Not a good time to be a Nazi. But when he saw, when he heard about Rockwell, and then when he met him through Savitri Devi, he was really happy. He became very optimistic about believing in this kind of Nazi resurgence led by Rockwell.
Mm-hmm.
So he was really kind of encouraged by Rockwell, but he also served as a kind of a mentor to Rockwell, who would often encourage Rockwell when he was feeling bad.
Okay.
So he would consistently reassure Rockwell of his place as Hitler's heir and the inevitability of their triumph. He also kind of patiently instructed Rockwell in, Nazi ideology and the history of Hitler's rise to power. So he was kind of a mentor, but also pretty much worshipped Rockwell.
God.
Interesting.
Just...
Yeah.
Oh, so Rockwell's crying,
Yes.
just vomiting in the corner, and he's patting him on the back, holding his hair back, saying, "Don't worry, you're the legitimate heir of Adolf Hitler, and it's all going to work
exactly
out."
What happened. Yes,
Amazing.
Yes.
Amazing.
So Lutke also claimed that when his anti-Nazi father was dying on his deathbed, he said to his son that he had a vision of him becoming the leader of Germany. That's what he said.
Okay.
He really kind of advised Rockwell on strategy, bolstered his courage, and he was saying, wild, wise things that, to Rockwell, like illegal things must be done, but never spoken. This is and Rockwell was like, so I shouldn't say to FBI.
Okay. Yeah. Tell me more. Yeah. But we can be best friends with the FBI still, right? I mean.
So he had he was arrested on numerous times, spent a lot of time in prison.
Yeah.
Because, it was very illegal to be a Nazi in Germany at the time. And he wrote to Rockwell from prison. And at one point, he was really in prison and feeling really, really depressed about his life. And then he had a vision. I'm not sure if it was a dream or like an actual vision, but he had a vision of himself dying and getting this glorious state Nazi funeral. And when he woke up, he was like completely renewed with energy and belief in the emerging global Nazi movement under Rockwell, and wrote to Rockwell about this. He also had like different kinds of very weird Nazi insane visions. Like, for example, he had a vision of a new Nazi global capital city, which I think is in Virginia in this vision. And so he imagined different architectural wonders, like, for example, Adolf Hitler Square, Lincoln Rockwell Hall, a great empire library, a Reichshof, which is the seat of the commander and his deputy, which would dwarf the Pentagon.
Oh.
So, yeah. And Rockwell would write to Lütke about how he's very lonely and fucked up and depressed and poor, and how much he misses his wife and children. And then Lütke would encourage sexual abstinence. He saw that as like a noble and necessary thing for the life of a great warrior, which Rockwell was.
Okay, so this guy that he dreams about
Yes.
on a nightly basis breaks up with his wife finally. And this guy's totally non-biased opinion is don't sleep with anybody else
Yes.
yet. Right. Yeah. That's
Yes.
all.
So Lütke warned to Rockwell that the movement must not tolerate any form of heresy, and this really means that they shouldn't tolerate any kind of challenge to the position taken by the leader, or Rockwell, really. And that the leader is a point of crystallization for the movement. So Rockwell is their point of.
This is just the what Zero Pussy does to an MFer meme in person.
Yeah, this whole thing is like that. So, and the whole history, So, Colin Jordan was second in the hierarchy to Rockwell. Lütke really saw Arlington as the new capital of global Nazi empire, and not London. And he not only that, but he actually saw the UK as the kind of the last Jewish strong point in Europe. Colin Jordan was skeptical at the beginning because he feared the anti-American bias among the European pretentious Nazis, who would maybe in his mind reject Rockwell as the leader.
I don't know that they would do that just because he's an American.
That's what Jordan
I think
thought.
the empty bottles of vodka clinking behind him.
They're probably not much better.
Yeah, it's true.
But they were at least not American. They had that, like they're German or something.
Yeah, right. They had that pedigree.
So, guzzle liters of beer instead.
Yes.
Yes.
So Lütke had this idea that when Rockwell seizes power in the US, he will create and establish a National Socialist World Senate to internationalize the movement. Which is, this kind of reminded me about some let's call them left communist people in the early stages of the Soviet Union, like Bordiga from Italy, for example. He had this idea. He proposed to Stalin that the Comintern should really run the Soviet Union, and Stalin said no, we're not going to do that. But I think this is like a Nazi version of that. There would be some kind of international Nazi Senate in the US, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So Lütke really insisted on this idea of a one hierarchy and one movement, which would be led by Rockwell, and that all Europeans need to accept that. Like, Rockwell is the global leader of the Nazi movement, and he really condemned any Europeans, any Euro Nazi movements who did not submit to Rockwell's leadership.
Interesting.
Lütke himself had no formal organization in Germany and almost no resources. He was really poor and no stormtroopers or anything like that. But he
did have visions.
He did have a network. He had contacts there, with actual Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1962, Rockwell secretly traveled to England via Ireland. He did that because he couldn't obtain a visa to go to the UK. So he went there illegally.
Okay.
Through some Irish Nazis who helped him.
All right.
And he attended a secret meeting of Nazi leaders from 7 countries. This was the US, UK, West Germany, France, Austria, Ireland, and Belgium in Cotswold, a village in England somewhere. So this was his first face-to-face meeting with Colin Jordan, Bruno Lütke, and Savitri Devi, and all of these people from Europe. This was a 6-day meeting during which they drafted a document which they called the Cotswold Agreement. And this was they laid out the plan for a National Socialist World Revolution there, and the final settlement of the Jewish problem. So they called it the final settlement.
I see.
Solution.
Very diplomatic.
Rebranding. A solution didn't work. We'll have to go for settlement this
yes.
time.
And this is when the World Union of National Socialists was formed to implement this plan. So at the beginning, Rockwell and Jordan were co-leaders. Jordan even had a kind of a honorific superior position in the first months, temporarily. But Rockwell was the one who clearly dominated this gathering.
Okay.
And within a few months, he became the former commander of WUNS. Let's call it that.
So sorry, you said former or formal?
Formal. So they use this term commander. Like, so Colin Jordan was the UK commander of
I
WUNS.
see.
And he was the European commander as well. So
excellent. Great
now
idea.
everyone
Have
is
a
a
Führerprinzip.
Yes.
Have a co-leadership Führerprinzip.
Yes.
What can go wrong?
So they announced in this paper the formation of an efficient political apparatus, which had the aim to destroy the international Jewish, communist, and Zionist conspiracy, I guess, and to form a world order based on race. So the criteria for joining WUNS that you had to acknowledge the spiritual leadership of Adolf Hitler. It's interesting they would say spiritual leadership.
Yeah, okay.
Because he entered the UK illegally, once he was found out, the UK authorities deported him to the US on August 9th of 1962. There was a lot of news coverage of this thing, and all of it was focused on Rockwell. Because Rockwell was very fearful of the US government and the FBI, he insisted that they present this agreement as just a working draft, because he was afraid that because he didn't register as a foreign agent, he feared that he would be arrested. So they always officially said that this is just a draft, they're thinking about different options. Rockwell supervised Jordan, who was now the Euro commander, and his organizational efforts in Europe, and encouraged the formation of new chapters. And by 1965, the World Union of National Socialists officially had chapters in 19 countries, not all of them European. So in 1962-63, Jordan was in prison. We covered this in one of the early episodes. This is he and Tyndall went to prison for having some paramilitary organizations, but Tyndall went out of prison earlier, and this is when he stole the wife of Jordan, Françoise Dior.
I think that's our first episode, actually.
First
or second.
Okay.
Yeah, it was our first Nazi wedding, I think, that we covered. Yeah.
Yeah, aw.
Yeah. But throughout his prison term, Jordan maintained the correspondence with Rockwell, because he's a very supportive elderly Nazi mother helped him by smuggling letters in and out of the prison.
So they're both mama's boys.
Yes, they both have support of their mothers.
Well, isn't that nice?
Yes. So Rockwell continued, when he writes to all of his friends, he's writing these sad letters how nothing is working out for him. So he also writes in 63 to Jordan how 24 of stormtroopers are in jail, he has no money, and how he runs ANP largely on guts, bluff, and fate.
Okay.
In 63, WUNS added chapters in Puerto Rico, Italy, Sweden, Iceland, and Japan.
So I'm actually curious, do you know anything about the Puerto Rican branch?
No.
Was this people from Puerto Rico, or white people?
Probably white people.
Or Americans living there?
I don't know anything about that one. But some of these, Iceland, for example, there's no proof that it ever existed. It's very mysterious. They claim, but this is interesting because this is where his ex-wife and children lived. So I don't know.
Right.
I don't know what was going on there.
Maybe he was also the Iceland chapter.
Yeah. The wife who died
probably
last year. Yeah. So I don't know. We don't know even if he claimed that she was kind of supportive of him for some period.
I mean, they went on a honeymoon to
but that's
cabin.
his autobiography.
Yes.
So I don't know. So Rockwell had problems with running this global organization because countries wouldn't let him in, so he couldn't really travel, and he even complained to Colin Jordan how he wasn't even able to go to Canada. So in 64 there was already a kind of European mutiny when this French Nazi Yves Jean, who was the leader of the WUNS chapter in France there, tried to replace Jordan as the Euro commander. But Colin Jordan and Lutke really kind of put down this mutiny and really asserted Rockwell's dominance there, because Rockwell as a commander was supposed to appoint each of the national and continental commanders.
Okay.
And because he didn't decide this, this French guy failed, and Colin Jordan remained the Euro commander. Rockwell really made an effort, and this is interesting, to locate former Nazis and incorporate them into the organization. And he was especially keen to get Martin Bormann to join.
Okay.
And so Lutke did Rockwell's bidding and really tried to find him. But we don't know what happened there. There's no, maybe they were smart enough not to write much about it. I don't know. So we don't know how successful they were in doing that. They also had a chapter in Lebanon, which was operated by a French person living in Beirut. They have had a chapter in Japan, and Rockwell had contacts there even before they formed the WUNS group organization. Like already in 1960, he was in communication with an ultranationalist group which was called the Greater Japan Patriotic Society, which advocated like Japanese racial purity and used a swastika as their emblem. And that year, their 17-year-old member killed the leader of the Japanese Socialist Party.
Damn.
Wow. All right.
They had also active chapters in Sweden and Denmark. And as I said, they claimed this chapter in Iceland, but there's no proof that it ever existed. In South Africa, the South African Anglo-Norman Union expressed interest in joining, but they had doubts about publicly embracing Nazi stuff, so they never officially joined. So in South America, their greatest success was in Chile and Argentina.
Not surprising.
In Chile, their guy was the former SS Colonel Franz Pfeiffer, who was actually like a real Nazi and kind of important in the Third Reich. And he actually started a National Socialist Party of Chile. That was the thing that existed, and he really really impressed Rockwell. And Rockwell really wanted for this Pfeiffer guy to be the continental commander for South America. What impressed him about this guy, not only that he was an SS colonel, and interestingly, this Pfeiffer guy was loyal to Rockwell. Like, he was really loyal to him and accepted him as
it's wild how easy this is for him.
Yes. 3 months after he was named the leader of WUNS Chile, authorities arrested his very good friend and collaborator called Werner Rauf and extradited him to West Germany for, he was tried for war crimes. He was an Eichmann collaborator and was accused of personally contributing to the murder of 90,000 Jews.
Damn.
And Rockwell was impressed how much Pfeiffer stood he supported his buddy Rauf, openly defending him, and even hired a Chilean lawyer for him. And in a letter to Rockwell, Pfeiffer even hinted that he would organize some kind of a prison rescue and get him out of the prison by using physical force.
Damn.
So when the Pfeiffer's Nazi party in Chile was outlawed, he refused to moderate his politics and was arrested in 1965. At that point, Rockwell concentrated more on Argentina. And their guy was Horst Eichmann, the son of Adolf Eichmann, who was the head of Argentine National Socialist Party. He had a significant following among Nazis living in Argentina.
Imagine.
But and he had this recognizable, he had the Eichmann brand, which was really important for Rockwell. But he was never fully loyal to Rockwell as much as this Pfeiffer guy was. And actually, Eichmann believed that the new Führer will rise from the German enclaves in South America and not from Arlington.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, Eichmann's got a way more legitimate claim there.
I was going to say,
kind of old school Nazism.
So,
except that his name is Horst, which doesn't have the same ring,
Yeah.
Horst.
In Australia, WUNS was led by an American guy called Howard Williams, who was a trusted disciple of Rockwell. I mean, he was not led, he organized it there, but the guy who was formerly the leader of it on his recommendation was this guy called Arthur Smith, also known as Paul Martin. But what really gave the Australians the edge is they had this member who was this mysterious career criminal called Brian Raven. So he kind of gave them the dangerous look Australia there.
See, that's a much better name.
Brian Raven? Yeah.
Brian Raven. He sounds like a fucking street magician.
Yes.
Yeah.
From 61 to 65 in Canada, their close collaborators were the Canadian Nazi Party. That was also a thing I didn't even know. So this is where one of the leaders was this guy called János Pál.
Hungarian fella,
Hungarian immigrant, and he was the other guy that I know that was a part of the World Union of Free Enterprise National Socialists. He was an international secretary there, and he was also one of the leaders of this Canadian Nazi Party. So they were the WUNS chapter in Canada, but there was a lot of infighting in Canada and fragmentation. So Rockwell had to choose among these rival groups there, and he chose this guy called John Beatty as the leader of WUNS Canada. And Lutke said for this John Beatty that he's the face of a Canadian Hitler.
If somebody told me that, I would have no idea what they meant. Got the face of a Canadian Hitler. What does that mean?
A dude whose teeth got knocked out by a hockey puck and his
He has that two-part head like Canadians in South Park. No.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, with a little Hitler mustache drawn on it.
Yeah.
All right, I got it now. Nice.
So Europe had the largest amount of chapters of this international organization. Some were largely fictitious. They claimed, I already mentioned, the Iceland one, but there was also a claim in Italy, Switzerland, and Hungary even. So this probably didn't really exist or barely existed. The Hungary one, there was a Hungarian exile Nazi, some general even, Arpad Henny or something like this, who proposed them to organize an underground chapter in Hungary, but Rockwell for some reason refused to authorize a chapter under this guy. I don't know what was the reason. Aron had
too tall.
Yeah. Aron had a moderately active groups there, but they were really strongly oppressed, let's call it, by the state. It was called Irish National Union, but they were the greatest disappointment for Rockwell because they refused to publicly endorse the Cotswold Agreement, although they supported it. And they wrote oh, come on, understand us, we are too young and too weak, we can't do this, and so on. So Rockwell was really pissed off by this. But then at some point, this guy, Bernard Horgan, took over the Irish organization, and then the Nazi activities there became more visible. In Spain, the organization was led by another German Nazi, a veteran of the Third Reich, Friedrich Kuchfuss.
Good old Freddy Kuchfuss.
Yes. But the nominal leader was some Spanish guy, Antonio Madrano, because I guess they thought it's not a good look for a German guy to be, the head. But the largest and the most active groups in Europe were in England, France, and Belgium. So in England, we know this is the National Socialist movement of Colin Jordan. They produced a lot of racist and anti-Semitic and Nazi propaganda there, and had public actions just like ANP did in America, and managed to recruit younger members. Jordan also had a kind of a cadre around him that was relatively competent. John Tyndall was one of them, but there was a few other guys there. And he had the support of his Nazi mother and his Nazi wife. I think he actually had two Nazi wives, both of them rich French women.
Okay.
But there was also a lot of infighting and fragmentation there. And Jordan really fought with everyone that he collaborated during these years, except his mother and Rockwell. And he had a kind of a slavish relationship with Rockwell. And often...
What about Rockwell's mother?
Yeah, I don't know about that. Maybe. But
she called the shots.
When they had a meeting in Britain, Jordan would give a speech, but the speech would basically only be an introduction for the tape that they would play, and this would be a speech by Rockwell that was sent to them from America. And that was like, listening to the tape was the main event.
That's some real fear principe right there.
Yes.
Yeah, that's commitment.
Sit through a fucking like tape.
Yes. So, but this French guy, Yves Jean, was not really having that, and he was in competition with Jordan to be the Euro commander. And he had, like, on his side, this thing that Lütke believed that France will be the center of the European National Socialist movement and not UK. And in France, they had some money there because Savitri Devi had some connections, and she was French. She helped the movement there. Also, this countess that I think was Jordan's second wife, like some French countess, Nazi countess that had a lot of money, and François Dior herself had a lot of connections and money. So France had money, not French Nazis had money. And Dior brought this guy called Claude Normand, who was a Waffen-SS officer, and he was a commander of a French SS unit in the Eastern Front, and he formed the first leadership of WUNS in France. But in '64, this Yves Jean guy took over and tried to take over the European organization, but couldn't manage to do it, and then he left the group in 1966. But this conflict with Jean also damaged the whole organization because, for example, Savitri Devi supported him in this struggle and not Colin Jordan. And this was, I think, a big blow for them because Savitri Devi was important for them.
Yeah,
she was
they have
super
to choose
weird.
between their mom and their dad, you know?
Yes. In Belgium, the first leader there was this guy called J.R. Debeau, who was like an editor of this Brussels right-wing paper, and he also fought in the Second World War in the Eastern Front, and was also a commander of a Walloon Legion of the Waffen-SS. He was also locating and recruiting former Nazis for the group. Like that was one of his tasks. There was also a conflict there because at some point this Jean guy Rockwell allowed him to become the commander of all of the French-speaking Nazis. So this Belgian guy was kind of demoted under this guy, so he didn't like that, so he resigned.
He could still command the Flemish Nazis.
Yeah. Well, I think a Flemish guy succeeded him. He had like a Flemish-sounding name, something like von Sand, something like this. It's the guy who Rockwell appointed. Although this is when he didn't listen to Lütke. Lütke wanted Leon de Grelle to become the head of Belgian WUNS. I don't know. I think de Grelle lived in Spain. I don't know how he would do that in Belgium. Anyway, Rockwell didn't listen to Lütke at this instance. In Germany, Germany was the most important country for them, but it was very hard to be a Nazi there in those years openly. So the activities were underground and clandestine. Lütke translated A&P literature and distributed to Germans, to Nazis there, and kept in close contact with Nazis throughout Germany. And he wrote to Rockwell how his words were like rain going down to the thirsty ground for these people.
That's sad.
That's some dry ground.
Yeah. So this was the first part.
I think there's a little bit of a lesson there, though. When people talk about some of the crimes of communists after World War II, like executing collaborators and capitalists that were sympathetic or sympathizers, you look at what happens in these countries in which they just didn't touch any of those people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, let's start another Nazi movement."
Yeah,
let's network.
Or the ones who didn't want to start an open, had actual power. Wasn't there a chancellor pretty much soon after the war who was the next member of the Nazi party in Germany? So yeah. Okay.
These rich French people just throwing money at Nazis.
Yeah.
End part 1.
These 3 parts will be shorter than the first one. I think the first one was by far the longest. I hope. Okay, so the second part the title is White Power. So during 1964, Rockwell managed to do a little tour in the south of the US and speak in front of kind of more respectable people than was his usual crowd. Like still very like horribly racist people, but kind of more middle class people with jobs and stuff going on in their lives, like members of the Birch Society or White Citizen Council and etc. And he kind of downplayed, the whole Hitler stuff while he was doing that. So in the midst of the turmoil between, of the clash between the civil rights movement and the segregationists and racists in the South, Rockwell decided to have more of that kind of approach to stuff and to run for governor of Virginia in 1965, which we mentioned in our previous premium episode. So he decided to less frequently refer to Adolf Hitler, dropped the swastika for this campaign, didn't even use the Nazi name. There were no stormtroopers, they were all dressed as campaign aides. And he really focused more on racial hatred than anti-Semitism for strategic reasons.
He embraced the whiteness there.
Yes. He wanted to exploit the racial tensions. So we mentioned in the last free episode about his whole theory, what will happen in America. There will be a race war, which is inevitable, and an economic crisis and chaos. The Jews will withdraw their investments. This is somehow important here. And the political order will be completely destroyed, and then the white American will sought a strong leadership to suppress the black uprising and bring a new order. And this will be the beginning of a new Nazi era led by Rockwell. So he believed that the terrorized middle-class whites will abandon liberal democracy and choose the safety that Rockwell's Nazi regime will offer. So he had a strong belief that, social chaos was necessary for his rise to power. And a lot of this stuff he did, I think, communicate. Maybe not in such a direct way, but the essential message was there in this campaign as well. So he planned this campaign for governor a year in advance. The idea was to inflame the Jews, as we already mentioned in the last free episode, and then get a lot of media attention, and in that way, the movement will grow. So the central motif of this campaign was this term white unity. So he believed there's one way for the whites to win, and that's to fight on the racial grounds, to think, act, and above all, vote as whites. He always believed that the vast majority of white people in America secretly agreed with his views. But even he was very optimistic, but the size and the enthusiasm of some of these crowds really kind of surprised him. And because there was a lot of people listening to him and cheering. So this created an unrealistic optimism in him, and he was prone to that in general. So at some point he really believed that he will win and become a governor. Then later in the campaign he realized this is not going to happen, and kind of made him depressed. And
so back to normal.
Yeah, he complained, I think to Lutke, how he had to fight in the campaign against his fellow racists. He thought it was a damn shame, because I think John Birch Society also had a candidate for governor, and in the end he got 6,500 votes, which really shocked him. Such a low result and really disappointed him. But what happened in 1966 is that Stokely Carmichael coined the phrase black power. So he used it to name this attitude coming from the younger black leaders in America who were kind of more radical than Martin Luther King and were critical of his pacifism and so on. And this gave the idea to Rockwell to start using the term white power for basically the same thing that during the campaign he called white unity.
Okay.
And this became a popular term across country among the racists as a response to black power. So, I mean, white power, they stole it from, black people. Even
Yeah, I was about to say
Yes.
again, another case of Nazis being utterly unoriginal.
Yes.
I mean, white power literally was stolen from black people, beyond the slogan. I mean,
Yeah,
Um,
indeed.
So he always thought, that there is a need for National Socialist America to broaden its appeal and evolve into a viable political movement. So this concept of white power was based on a pan-white inclusion.
Right.
And this really differed greatly with Hitler's racist ideas. So, Hitlerism was all about the exclusivity of the Nordic Germanic superiority. And that's what their racism was about. They saw Southern Mediterranean Europeans and especially Slavic people as racially inferior. It also differed from the traditional American idea of what a white person is, which is this WASP concept that we also talked about when we talked about the KKK. Really, through white power, he offered a new kind of racist thing, which was more inclusive than both traditional Nazi stuff and traditional American racism as well.
Yeah.
He believed that the whites are outnumbered and they cannot afford to exclude anyone who was not clearly a part of the dark peoples, as he called them. So this included, Southern Europeans, Slavs, Greeks, Catholics, and others for strategic reasons. This
is still a difficult concept for European Nazis even today, who are starting to identify more with the white power angle of racism, but still national divisions, kind of supersede white affiliation. So you see that a lot with American Nazis. They go to Europe and they're like, "Oh, you're all white people," and then they'll be like, "Well, Albanians aren't white,"
right,
or something.
Yeah. So when he did that, he really deviated from Hitler's racial dogma, but he created a strategy, a legacy for future white races that's kind of still alive, but which is also really in tune with the modern American idea of what white is. This is just a more extreme version of it, but
it's quite an impact actually.
Yeah. But this created a rift among Nazis, including AMP members, and there was a rupture there. For example, his young propaganda chief, John Patsalos, who changed name to Petler, who was the son of Greek immigrants, he was very enthusiastic about this white power thing. He was short, had black hair, dark eyes, and Rockwell really liked him a lot. On the other hand, Matthias Koehl, he was a real Germanophile. He didn't like this at all. Koehl believed this was heresy, and he actually believed this white power thing was the bad influence Petler had on Rockwell. Koehl respected and followed Rockwell, but he really worshipped Hitler, and he thought that this deviation is an abomination. And this view was shared by a minority in ANP, but an influential one. And William Pierce was one of those people who sided with Koehl. So in 1965, two factions formed in ANP. One was the Aryan Unity faction led by Koehl and Pierce, which was strongly on this Nordic Germanic racial superiority thing. And the other one was the White Power faction, which was led by Rockwell himself. But Rockwell did not want a split in the party, and he demanded from Petler not to antagonize these Nazi purists, the Hitlerists, and to be very diplomatic with them. But Rockwell, in the end, he was the leader, so he prevailed. He was victorious, and he managed to suppress Koehl's potential mutiny. Or did he? We'll talk more about that in the last chapter of today. And he thought, the real triumph of his idea were the Chicago riots of 1966. So Chicago was one of the most segregated cities in the north of the States. And Martin Luther King announced in 1966 that he will lead a demo there in support of open housing in mainly Italian-American and Polish-American neighborhoods. As I mentioned, King by that time had a lot of critique from younger black leaders in America who were kind of saying that his time has passed and criticized his approach. So King, in a way, wanted to go there to Chicago to prove them wrong. But what happened there was really kind of shocking for everyone, King included. Rockwell saw this as a perfect opportunity for him to, confirm his white power strategy and include all of these working class racists from Chicago, from the Polish and Italian communities there. And in this idea of forming a new white majority in America. As I said, the violence there was shocking in its intensity and magnitude both. So the thing that was shocking about it was that the whole families, kids included, participated in the violence. So at first, 1,000 people attacked King's March there with bricks and bottles, shouting racist slogans and waving Nazi and Confederate flags.
Damn.
So,
Fuck.
Yeah. Polish people with Nazi flags, huh?
Yes. And kids, women, children, 1,000 of them. And they even cheered when a rock struck King in the head. This number of racists grew to 2,500 at some point. And, AMP banners were visible in the crowd. Rockwell was everywhere during the day. He distributed white power t-shirts that he made. For this occasion, you can find pictures of, people, a lot of people wearing white power t-shirts at these riots. And he, would climb a car to direct the crowd and give speeches and so on. And King said that he never saw such a hostile crowd, even not in Alabama or Mississippi. And by some, this was seen as King's failure and Rockwell's triumph. And he gained an enormous publicity for this thing. Many Americans, in fact, heard about him for the first time during these riots. In the end, he gave a speech in front of several thousand of people who cheered. But when, everything stopped, when they all left from Chicago and this whole Nazi orgy stopped, the local racists kind of reconsidered and were even embarrassed by what they did. Not by racism, but I think a lot of them didn't actually want to be, perceived as Nazis,
Right.
And they were like, wait, maybe we,
Are we the baddies?
We're just racist.
Yes. So he didn't get a lot of, he had AMP had a Chicago branch, but he didn't get a lot of new members from this, I think. But he became convinced that his strategy was right. And Lutke reassured him from Germany that Hitler would approve of the white power approach.
Great.
So this led to them changing the name of the party on January 1st, 1967, by the edict of the commander. The name of the American Nazi Party was changed to the National Socialist White People's Party. This was a part of this white power strategy. And a new publication was created called White Power, and Rockwell started working on his book called White Power.
Great.
That's the end of our second part.
Eventful.
Today.
Rockwell's chugging away here. It's definitely in his manic phase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our friend of the show, Koehl, has an interesting theory about
Rockwell being crazy?
Yeah, about going back to our 7-Up conspiracy. The stay behind 7-Up soda, apparently, he says, had lithium in it.
Yes, it did.
Right?
Yeah.
Up until the point that Rockwell became an all-out Nazi.
Yeah, and by the way, PepsiCo company that produces 7-Up has close ties to CIA, which we found out after the last episode. Really super close. Yeah.
But Pepsi didn't acquire 7-Up until the 80s or something.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, well. Yeah.
7-Up was remarkably independent for quite some time.
Okay, so
they
the
got
theory
acquired
doesn't
by
work.
They got acquired by Philip Morris, which is another kind of evil, but
not better.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so it's in the 7-Up. He drank the 7-Up, folks.
Part 3 is Christian identity.
Whoa.
So even
surprise entrance.
While he was a student in during college, Rockwell abandoned his Methodist upbringing and stopped being a Christian. At that time, he would say that he was an agnostic. But he always really recognized the power that religion had over people, and he really admired that. So at some point, he started paying attention to this thing called Christian identity as a possible channel for his political efforts and a kind of a basis for a Nazi church that he dreamed of. So Christian identity, we did 3 episodes on.
Yeah, they're about.
Yeah. I don't know if we should just briefly mention what it is, but so this is this.
If you haven't listened to those episodes,
Yeah, we have an episode about what happened before Christian identity, this British Israelism movement, and then the early kind of American Christian identity, and one about Aryan nations, the complete fusion between Nazism and Christian identity. So it's this crazy idea that originally it was that the Anglo-Saxons were the original ancient Israelites and God's chosen people and racially superior to everyone else, and how the actual Jews are this like Satan spawn and racial abomination and not the actual Israelites, something like that.
Yeah, that would be the Christian identity moment, right,
Yes.
when it separates
Yes.
from British Israelism.
Yes.
And then, like, the UFO craze kicks in, and for a couple decades at least, the Jews are also the spawn of this satanic shape-shifting alien.
Yeah.
And the whole thing was like a galactic battle. And then, Richard Butler, good old Dick Butt, picks up the torch and, becomes like the Pope of the
Nazi
people who
Christian
believe
identity.
that Jews are shape-shifting satanic aliens.
Yeah.
Yes.
In America, because originally British Israelism is British, but in America they kind of parallel to this white power idea. They expanded the idea who the descendants of ancient Israelites are. So it's not only Anglo-Saxon people; it's some other white people as well. So there's a parallel there in what Rockwell was trying to do with white power stuff. And so Rockwell was really contributed a lot to Christian identity becoming completely intertwined with the white racist movement in the US. In the 1940s, Wesley Swift, Fritz talked about him in an episode, emerged as a dominant Christian identity figure and leader in the US.
If you want to hear crazy, he's your man.
Oh yeah.
He shaped the doctrine of racial purity, of Christian identity, and created congregations across America. His biggest success was in the South and in California, which is interesting. I mean, California is usually seen as a kind of an opposite of South, no? The South in America is like an open-minded thing, but apparently...
I think especially outside of the U.S. or... certainly, like maybe in some parts of the U.S., but I think that people that know California well know that California is like one of the most deeply reactionary states in the entire country.
But it does take a certain open-mindedness to accept that, white people are energy aliens from thousands of years ago.
A different kind of open-mindedness.
Yeah.
So
Swift was really popular with the Klan. He brought a lot of them together. He got close friend of Gerald L.K. Smith, who we also talked about in the previous.
Yeah, he was his
A&P
disciple.
episode.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
And in the
His
1950s, Swift recruited Richard Butler, who you mentioned. Also, an episode about him. We have
Richard Gerndt Butler. I always like that middle name.
Yes, the Dick Butt, as you call him. He was already a Nazi at the time. And he became the most important convert that Swift ever had, and the future leader of his congregation, which he organized as Aryan nations, and completely fused Nazi stuff with Christian identity. After during Swift's life, but especially after his death, Butler really devoted his life to Christian identity. And in 1970, Swift died, and he became the leader of Christian identity in America. Butler was also introduced Christian identity to Rockwell in the early 1960s. Although before that, Rockwell had close contacts with people who would become Christian identity ministers in the future. This was in the 50s when he was a part of the group who started the National States' Rights Party in the South.
Yeah, right.
So a lot of these people would become Christian identity ministers under Swift and through Butler. So in the 1950s, there was this period when future A&P members and leaders like Rockwell and Koehl and James Warner worked closely together with Christian identity people or ones who will become Christian identity leaders, such as Swift and Butler and this guy called Orrin Fenton Potito and Conrad Lynch.
What?
And Gordon Winrod.
Potito.
Yeah, some Potito guy.
Potito.
Yeah.
You know, I have here in my notes about Christian identity that in 64, the FBI believed that Swift was giving Rockwell money for the A&P, and that Rockwell in turn was telling A&P members to attend Wesley Swift meetings.
Yes,
when he would come around.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that now. So even before Rockwell met Butler, he was thinking about creating some kind of a Hitler-based religion. And he discussed this with Emory Burke, which is this older American Nazi that we mentioned in the last 3 episodes. He is the one who was already Nazi during the war, maybe I think before the war as well. And he, after the war, created one of the first American Nazi groups called the Columbians, that at some point I guess we'll talk about. And he remained, Rockwell's supporter and advisor until Rockwell died. And through Burke in this correspondence, Rockwell sent drawings of movement leaders in military style clerical attire. Like he had his fantasies about this Hitler religion and like various orders that he envisioned as a part of this brotherhood and so on.
Have you seen these uniforms?
No.
I wonder if Burroughs got in on that. He would love that.
Yeah. In 1962, Bruno Lütke translated the Rockwell's book, This Time the World, and then he kind of recommended to Rockwell to soften his anti-Christian rhetorics. And he thought this is not like strategically good. Like he was completely anti-Christian, but he thought it was pragmatic not to do it. And this again kind of unleashed this Rockwell's dream of a Nazi religion. And he had this idea of creating a Christian naturalist church. This is how he called it. Lütke encouraged him to do so, and he wrote to him, millions of boobs would swell its ranks and sweep you to power. This is the idea.
Millions of swelling boobs.
Yes.
What?
So they wanted to use this Christian name for mass appeal. Although they thought that Christianity is Jewish as Bolshevism is.
I mean, this was an issue in original Nazism as well. A lot of original Nazis were obviously not very Christian, anti-Christian. But then they, made their own little version for mass appeal. Yeah.
So as I said, they believed that Christianity is as Jewish as Bolshevism, but they thought that the National Socialism Adolf Hitler could re-emerge as the new religion of the masses within this Rockwell-crafted pseudo-Christianity. That was the idea. But one guy who was really not having it was Colin Jordan. He hated this idea. He was very anti-Christian, didn't like it at all. And Lütke had to spend a lot of time to persuade Colin Jordan, we are also anti-Christian just as much as you are, but these are the reasons we are doing it and so on.
Yeah, just take him on a tour of the South. He'd get it in a heartbeat.
Yes.
There's no way around it.
But Jordan never really completely accepted this idea and this distinction that they made between, strategic value of Christianity and its the actual Christianity, which he abhorred. So he remained unconvinced, but he didn't publicly disagree or dispute anything that Commander said. So energized by these ideas, Rockwell contacted Swift, probably through Butler, because Butler was close with both of them. And on the night of June 10th, 1964, the two men, Swift and Rockwell, met on a secret location to discuss basically kind of a merger between their two movements. From that day onwards, they created a close working relationship that lasted until Rockwell died. And Rockwell, after that, he really gave a special mission to one of his most trusted troopers, which was this guy called Ralph Perry Forbes, who was very loyal and devoted to Rockwell, but he had this kind of a mystical side to him. He believed in all kinds of signs and prophecies and so on. So Rockwell thought that this is a perfect guy to channel into the Christian identity movement. This is the guy who will create this merger for me. And he would exploit this guy's, mystical beliefs. So he would write to him things like, "You are a man sent by destiny to provide them with a new faith," and so on. And he wrote to him how Rockwell will organize the political movement, and this guy Forbes should do the same for the spiritual movement. And he told him, like, you should go to California and really merge our movement there in form kind of a nucleus of a church. And he persuaded him to recruit this really militant follower of Swift called William Fowler and use him as a leader in the church. So what Forbes did was he basically merged AMP Western Division in California with a new Christian identity congregation there. He even had a task given to him by Rockwell to come up with a new doctrine of the second coming. I don't know what he did with that.
Oh man, I'd read it.
But he really manipulated Forbes' obsession with symbols and prophecies. So he wrote like stupid things like this to him. This is Rockwell writing to Forbes. I often noticed the amazing similarity between the name of the birthplace of the great prophet and leader of Christianity, which is Nazareth. And he said, like, this, like, there's more to this name than meets the eye. And then to prove his point, he would say, change one letter and it becomes Nazireth. Surely the Almighty is telling us something here. And this worked, of course. So Forbes became
a nation of joiners.
Wait, it's not pronounced Nazareth.
Yes.
It is now.
The Z is not. Jeez,
people are idiots. So
Nazireth.
Nazireth. Yeah.
Yes, Nazi wrath. There you go.
So
that's it.
Fuck me.
Forbes became.
These are guys who thought Denmark was founded by a guy named Dan. You know.
Yes.
Like. Yeah.
Well, it's a logical.
That's Christian identity. Yeah.
It's a mark. Dan's mark. It's
Dan's mark.
Yeah.
That's enough for CI, and it's enough for me.
I mean, use your you always need to use common sense.
Exactly right.
So Forbes became a Christian identity minister and preached throughout Southern California, and actually had like a pretty large following there, a congregation that continued to exist long after Rockwell was dead. I don't know if it still exists. I wouldn't be surprised. Right. And Forbes actually considered Rockwell to be God's latter-day apostle to America and all of the lost sheep and nations through Israel.
Sorry, as you were saying that, I was just picturing like Rockwell asleep on the floor.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, vomiting and crying. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Here he is.
Yeah. So Swift continued his relationship with Rockwell until Rockwell died, and Butler really, after the death of both of these men, continued this synthesis between Nazism and Christian identity in his group, Aryan Nations, which in a way was a realization of what Rockwell wanted in some way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so there is I noticed in this book there is a quote by a distinguished gentleman called R.E. Cooper. I don't know if you recognize the name.
Cooper the pooper?
That's the poop Nazi, yes.
Yeah, the guy with the trash.
The book includes
guy.
like something that he said about this topic, which the Cooper recognizes Swift as basically the founder of Nazi-based Christian identity, but he thinks that Butler was the man who really reached the masses with this.
He did.
Yeah. I don't agree with everything that Cooper the Pooper does and says, but I think he nailed this one.
Yeah, we talked about Cooper the Pooper in our last premium episode, so who wants to know what's that?
So if you're wondering why we call him that,
pony up.
Why we call the episode a shit show? Then yeah.
Oh yoy.
So that was the third part, and we only have one more part.
We're good.
That's the death.
That's the death.
The death. Yes.
Buckle in.
We love it.
We're going to the laundromat.
Okay, part 4, death. So, John Patsalos, who changed his name to Petler in 1960, I think, was born in New York City in 1938.
Greek race trader. Sorry.
Yeah. He grew up in a violent anti-Semitic household, dominated by his father, who was an immigrant from Greece. In 1943, his father shot and killed his mother.
Damn.
in the kitchen of their New York City apartment because he believed she was flirting with other men behind his back, which is, yeah.
Wow. That's how you start a Nazi.
Yes.
Right
this father asshole went to prison, and his two sons, Butler and his brother, who they were like 4 and 5 years old, went to live with their maternal mother, who was really devastated by her daughter's death and cried about it all the time. Dad served less than 10 years in prison. He was released on parole, and shortly after he was released, the grandmother died, and he claimed custody of his sons, and they went to live with him. So John lived with his father, who he hated and feared. And from an early age, he was involved in petty crimes that became more serious as he got older, and he continued this throughout his teens. The juvenile court sent him to a mental hospital. The psychiatrist there noted that he frequently used anti-Semitic comments and addressed them to the hospital Jewish staff. They diagnosed him as like being paranoid, and also said that he's probably a repressed homosexual. This is what the shrink said. Mm-hmm. They also noted that he might become dangerous and even a potential murderer. So they were very specific.
Yeah.
He was observed extensively, and he received a court-mandated outpatient treatment. But in 1957, he stopped keeping his outpatient appointments, and the hospital didn't pursue this matter further. They just noted the missed appointments in his file.
The guy who we said is going to be a murderer.
Is not showing up suddenly.
Oh, well.
I wouldn't worry about it.
In 1956-57, he was frequently espousing his anti-Semitic attitudes, as well as his belief that the U.S. was controlled by the Jews and that Hitler was right when he attempted to murder all of them in Europe. This is where, again, we meet that weird, rich, supposedly sophisticated New York Nazi called D. West Hooker. Who so impressed Rockwell and encouraged him to become an open Nazi, and was like the most important person for Rockwell in his life, although he knew him only briefly. He was very important for Petler as well, because D. West Hooker started a Nazi group in New York City, which was called the Nationalist Youth League, and he recruited Petler for the group. And he became an idol for Petler. That's what he wrote later. This continued his kind of criminal activities, and he was arrested for criminal libel, but instead of going to prison, he accepted the court's offer and joined the Marine Corps. While he was in basic training, his father died. In 1960, while stationed in Quantico, Virginia, Butler restarted his earlier friendship with Rockwell. He met him 2 years prior to that through D. West Hooker. And they became like pretty good friends, and he joined the A&P and quickly rose through the ranks. He was a kind of Rockwell's favorite, it seems. And he became the party's youngest staff officer. He was like a good propaganda prop for them, because he wore his Marine uniform until Marines discharged him. Like, they gave him a general discharge, not a dishonorable or anything like that, for being a Nazi. After that, he devoted all of his time to Rockwell and the party. He also, at that time, adopted an Anglo-Saxon name, Petler, and with Rockwell's encouragement, he married a German American called Erika von Gundlach. In this book, she's described as a submissive German American.
Strange description.
Yes. So they quickly made 2 kids, like a lot of these people. And
breeders.
Yes, and Rockwell's direction, he moved from Virginia with his family back to New York City to start an A&P chapter there. And within 2 years of being there, his marriage fell apart completely. He divorced Erika, and she got the custody of the kids. And Petler moved back to Virginia to Rockwell, to the headquarters.
As I recall, she said it's either Rockwell or me, and Petler chose incorrectly.
Yeah. So maybe not so submissive.
Doesn't sound so much.
Yeah.
No. Put her foot down and walk
Yeah,
out.
seemed pretty decisive.
Yeah.
I mean, Petler was much more submissive, actually.
Yeah.
In Virginia, his life completely revolved around Rockwell. He followed him everywhere. He was his chauffeur, his bodyguard, all the time with him. One journalist observed that Petler loved Rockwell passionately, drawn to him by irrational loyalty. In 1964, Petler met another woman called Alice Irving, who was 19 years old. Petler was 26. They married in 1966. Already by the time that they married, they already had their first son, and soon they got a second son. From that point on, for a little while at least, Petler became a bit different. He was more self-confident, a more assertive person, and he found some self-esteem and gained some identity which was apart from Rockwell. And he resigned from AMP and moved back to New York City. Now, again, this is the time when, together with his best and closest friend, Dan Burroughs, they started an ANP clone there called the American Nationalist Party.
Right, ANP.
Yeah.
Yes. We have an episode about Burroughs. He's the guy who was a very weird ANP stormtrooper who was a closeted Jewish person.
And suicidal.
Yes.
Like in many, many ways. Yeah.
Yes. But soon he started feeling bad because he left Rockwell, and Petler wrote, "It was a difficult thing for me because I still loved him, though I was no longer a blind follower."
Yeah, and largely blames Burroughs also for this falling out.
Okay. So he grew restless, and in mid-1966, he returned to Virginia. And Rockwell welcomed him back and restored his place in the ANP hierarchy, which probably really pissed off Koehl and all of the other people there.
Yeah, Pierce, who hated him.
Yes. So he had a lot of fights with other ANP members, and with Rockwell included, and often altered between fighting with Rockwell and then crying and begging for forgiveness. That was the dynamic of their relationship all the time.
Yeah.
So there is a quote here that I want to read. This is a letter from Rockwell to Petler. "My reasoning with you, my most strenuous efforts to rehabilitate you, my downright brotherly feeling of real love for you, my best efforts to please you, my efforts to discipline you, nothing helps. You react to all of these precisely the way a spoiled kid would react to all of them."
50 Shades of Rockwell here.
Yeah.
Go.
And so Petler to this responded by returning the letter that Rockwell sent back to Rockwell, and with the passages that he didn't like, he crossed them out and wrote some cryptic phrases on the margins.
Okay.
But then within 2 days, he sent another letter begging Rockwell for forgiveness. So it's a complicated relationship.
Oof.
Clearly.
At the time, he was blaming Rockwell for his disastrous first marriage. He said that Rockwell made him marry that woman. And also for him, changing his name and abandoning his ethnic identity. He also blamed Rockwell for that as well. And for this whole period from late 66 and early 67, he drifted in and out of the ANP with this dynamic, from unconditional devotion to hatred for Rockwell.
Yeah.
And in the last known letter to Rockwell, he wrote, this is Petler now writing to Rockwell, "I feel much better after talking to you. I want so badly to get back into the spirit of things and push for you all the way. I don't think there are two people on earth who think and feel the same as we do. You are a very important part of my life. I need you as much as you need me. Without you, there is no future."
Jesus.
I mean, were they hooking up?
I mean,
these are sad relationship letters.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
These are people who are not able to break a bad relationship. Break up. Just break up, man. It's not working.
I guess he doesn't.
Well, this is the question now. We'll see. So, about the breakup. So George Lincoln Rockwell was shot and killed as he backed his car out of a parking space in front of a laundromat in a strip mall. This happened in Arlington on August 25, 1967. Soon after that, like moments after that, Arlington police arrested John Petler. He was alone on foot, a bit less than 2 miles away. Mm-hmm. So for some people, this was suspicious because they arrested him quickly after the murder, and he was 2 miles away. The evidence was circumstantial, but he was convicted for this murder, and he always claimed that he was innocent. Mm-hmm. The claim was that he was seeking revenge for Rockwell expelling him from the party in March of 1967. He was especially offended that Rockwell didn't do it himself, but he assigned Koehl, who Petler hated, to do it, and sent angry letters to Rockwell, but then again begged him to forgive him and so on. This whole thing happened. There was also a different reason why Petler was supposedly angry at Rockwell, and this was Rockwell's supposed unwillingness to protect him from other members of the group, like Koehl and Pierce, who frequently used to call him a greasy Greek.
Yeah. Pierce thought he was an animal.
Yeah. And a third thing that's interesting, but that wasn't mentioned in the trial, was that Petler discovered that Rockwell was having an affair with his wife, Alice Petler.
Okay, I've heard this rumor.
Yes,
yeah.
And he wrote a letter to Rockwell saying that he was okay with that.
Whoa.
And he said, if Alice wants to make it with you, I wouldn't object. That is the truth. Whew. So, interesting stuff, no?
Very interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Many of Rockwell's close friends and collaborators and important people in A&P believed that there was a conspiracy inside the party to kill Rockwell, a kind of a coup to take over the party. And they usually see Matt Koehl as the organizer of this, with the help of William Pierce and Robert Lloyd, who we mentioned, I think, in a previous free episode. They believe that these three orchestrated the killing and used someone else. They were not the actual shooters, but they organized it. So some of them actually witnessed that the night before Rockwell was murdered, Rockwell had a huge fight with Koehl, Pierce, and Lloyd over the direction where the party is heading. They didn't like this white power stuff, dropping swastika, Nazi name, and so on, apparently. But I'm not completely sure this is true, but this is what was said. And enraged, Rockwell locked them out of their three offices. They were not able to enter their offices. And apparently he confided to one stormtrooper that they will be expelled from the party by the end of the week or something like that.
That's interesting. Pierce would say that he was proud of Rockwell for dropping the swastika because that's the shit that he wanted Rockwell to do from the beginning.
Yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense because he had a group called National Alliance. He didn't have a Nazi name in it. Didn't use a Nazi swastika. So I don't know. Some of these people believe that they framed Petler. Some I think believe that they used Petler to do it somehow. So, for example, Frank Smith was a Rockwell's loyal bodyguard, and he went to prison for a bombing and also an attempted murder. He was a stormtrooper, close supporter of Rockwell and a Nazi, worshipped Rockwell completely. He
bombed the synagogue, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Probably, yeah. So Rockwell was shot previously. There was another incident when he was shot at. Before this one, in June of 1967, in front of party headquarters, and Smith said that Rockwell confided to him that he thought that he kind of recognized one of the shooters, and that if this is true, if this is the person, Rockwell said that he believes there is a conspiracy against him by someone very close to him, but he didn't want to say to Smith who is he suspecting is doing this because he wasn't completely sure. And so after the murder, Smith did his own investigation, and he concluded that Koehl, Pierce, and Lloyd were the organizers of this, and he believed that the actual shooter was this guy from Chicago called Chris Vidnevich, who apparently was a racial purist of this Aryan unity type, which I don't know. I mean, doesn't he realize that Vidnevich is not a Norwegian last name? I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. I guess confused people.
And also kind of the worst of the Slavs too.
Yeah.
South Slav, they're the least Aryan looking.
Yes. There was even at some point a gunfight between Smith and Vidnevich because of this thing.
Oh,
unfortunately, they both survived this. The funeral itself was also a complete circus. So because I don't know if you remember Rockwell's brother Bobby, who tried to help him early on. Yeah. He initiated a legal action to get Rockwell's body and to bury him just in a family ceremony without a lot of people. But Kay really got pissed off because of this, and he threatened to surround Rockwell's mother's home, Claire, who was a loyal supporter of the party the whole time.
Yes,
to surround her home, which was in a Jewish section of New York City, with uniformed stormtroopers, and basically endanger her safety there, something like that, and make a whole circus out of it. So Bobby really gave up and gave them Rockwell's body to bury him as they want to.
They wanted to bury him at Arlington, is that right?
They wanted to bury him at some military graveyard with military funeral,
Arlington National Cemetery,
because he was entitled to it, and the military said, okay, yes, you are, but we won't allow you to do it if he will wear a Nazi uniform and you are wearing Nazi uniforms and you have a Nazi flag over the coffin.
Which is pretty fair, very simple rules.
Yes, which is exactly what Koehl wanted to do. So they arrived all dressed like Nazis, with a lot of Nazi stuff. And then some armed military men didn't allow them to enter the graveyard, and they made a whole circus out of it. There are pictures of them shouting. This Vidnevich guy, who the Smith says kill him, he's on a car shouting. So there's a whole circus. So
did the casket get knocked over?
Yes, probably.
and his body rolled out Zig Heiling or something.
So Koehl gave up, and then he cremated him in the end.
Oh, it's Culpeper National Cemetery in Virginia. That's where they tried to bury him.
Oh, okay.
So that was the undignified life and death and burial of George Lincoln Rockwell.
He could have given him back. He could have given the body back to the family again and been like, well, here, we tried. You guys can do your plan. But no.
Where'd they scatter the ashes? Do you know?
I don't know. I think it's possible.
Oh, I know.
They kept them.
Yeah, William Pierce. William Pierce was the curator of those ashes.
Oh, really? Okay. So
it was one of his official duties.
What happened to them later? Are they still around?
I think they still have them. As well as Savitri Devi's ashes.
That's right. Yeah, because she used to bum around the A&P, I understand. She used to sleep on their couch and shit when she came through. Yeah. And also, I think it was only the A&P that was at her funeral. It was just they set it up, I think.
Yeah. I don't know. We'll talk about that in our next episode.
Oh, okay. All right. Which is esoteric Hitlerism, if I'm not mistaken.
Something like that. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'll call it like that, actually. But we'll see.
Okay.
Savitri Devi will be a part of it. Not a very big part of it. It will be more focused on American stuff. But later on, we'll have to come back to Savitri Devi.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, origins of white power.
Yes.
There's a lot of stuff in this episode. I don't know. I was thinking a little bit after Ray was talking about the international portion and why they put so much faith into Rockwell. Right? It's odd. This Rockwell is a complete fuck up with this group of fuck up nobodies, and I guess you could say the situation in Europe was really bad and they were just looking for any kind of direction, blah, blah, blah. But I also feel like some European Nazis always thought that America was the missing link, and they never really had a strong enough, as they saw it, movement of actual Americans having a true National Socialist Party. They had the Bund before, which was a disgrace. Pelly, who was also never really had that kind of support of European Nazis in that way.
No, they avoided them.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that like in this crisis situation in Europe, and given the amount of press that Rockwell was getting, which was disproportionate to their numbers, right? It seemed like, well, okay, maybe there's a chance there, right? If there's a chance anywhere, there's a chance there. We might as well go for it because, I mean, they had pretty apocalyptic conditions in most of the rest of Europe, right?
Press-wise, they were extremely efficient. I mean, like they would send out one Stormtrooper and get covered in like 6 papers,
right?
And be on TV and shit. Yeah.
Right. So, it's kind of like when in the Temple of Blood episode when we talked about like how North Koreans portrayed the Rural People's Party as like a big respected movement in the United States upholding the Juche idea. These guys could be like, well, look at all the press these guys are getting. I mean, there's a strong movement there, Yeah. Is there a strong movement in Germany right now? I don't think so.
So I think they thought, if they're so public Nazis doing very Nazi stuff with swastikas in America or all of the places, which is now the most important country in the world, this probably means they hoped for some kind of a resurgence and saw some significance in that. And of course, he was relatively, skillful in using media attention. So they would see him probably, and they thought that's significant. It's the first time since the war you're seeing like Nazis, in the streets, and it's in America. So I guess that probably impressed them.
Yeah. Yes. And so, I mean, even if they didn't totally believe in Rockwell himself, they figured they could influence him enough. And if there was a real movement, then they could do something.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just how I imagine.
It is hard to believe that they were truly this devoted to Rockwell, but I mean, a few of them really seem to be, and very key ones.
Yeah.
He seemed to have a secure place.
No, I do think it was maybe like the grass is always greener. Like maybe there's something in America.
I mean, Nazis had their own networks that probably we'll discuss at some point. I mean, for sure we will. But I guess this one was different because it was so public in America. So I guess they had to pay some attention to it.
Yeah, he was a celebrity Nazi.
Yeah.
Crazy times.
Well, that was that for AMP for now, although in our next premium episode we'll talk a bit more about some of these people, specifically Koehl. So we're not quitting them completely.
No, and they'll be back for our boy William Pierce too.
Yes, there will be some more of this post-AMP stuff with some of the same people. We'll see what they did after Rockwell.
Yeah, they had a bigger legacy, I guess, than most people.
Yes.
Yeah, for real.
Realize, yeah.
Well then, well done, Rockwell, you freak.
Indeed.
You and Cooper the Pooper, the whole lot of you. You did it. All right. Well, see y'all later.
Okay.
All right, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Hey there, Fritz here from The Empire Never Ended. This has been one of our weekly free episodes for free people. But for premium people, we also have weekly premium episodes, which you can get at patreon.com/tenepod, TENEPOD, and also follow our various social media things in the show description there. Like and subscribe them. Follow them. Like and follow and subscribe. Follow them. Do it.